How would you describe to a lay person what Jungian psychology is?
Oh my God.
How would you describe God?
It's a little bit like that. You know, as I was being carried along by the material, I could feel something shifting inside me.
Oh, I don't like the word resilience.
I don't like it either.
No, when people say we're training in resilience, I'm like, really?
oh,
You're going to
no.
break. If you're training in
I know-
resilience,
I
you are
know,
going to break.
that's
Might argue that Freud saw penises everywhere, even where there weren't penises, or where there wasn't repressed sexual energy.
It is for everyone. If you can be brave, if you're really willing to go on a journey of discovery.
It's Friday the 13th. It's lucky for me because I've come to see one of the most amazing friends, someone that I admire so much, someone who has been, how long, Ness, now have we known each other?
Oh, it's got to be nearly 30.
73 years or something?
It's probably about 26, 27?
Yeah, almost, no, I would say 30.
Maybe 30.
Yeah, 30, actually
Yeah, I mean,
30
we're
years.
coming up to our 30th.
You're on my 30th anniversary.
Yeah.
Yeah. More from Ness in a minute. What I wanted to do was to say how lucky Friday the 13th is for me. A quick spoiler alert, we are going to look back in a few episodes' time at some of the themes that are emerging from the first 10 or so episodes. And I think the first thing that's really coming across as a central theme is the extent to which we need to take responsibility for our own health. No one else out there is really going to look after this property that we own or this property that we own. The second is the role of inflammation in disease, in aging, the disorder of the immune system, which if it's chronic, if it's constant, if we have constant inflammation, the role of that in aging and in disease. But thirdly, and that's critical for today, the huge impact, not just of food, not just of other toxic inputs, but the emotion, the mindset that we have, the way that we think, the way that we feel rests in the body. And it also is largely a major cause of that chronic inflammation. There are books like The Inflamed Mind that deal with this. So this is no tangential podcast today. This is right at the heart of what we're exploring with the John Vincent podcast, and right at the heart of Vanessa's home. We have Hazel, the dog. She's actually looked up. We have Casper, who's almost asleep. We have Natasha behind the camera, and Vanessa herself. So Vanessa, thanks for having us in your beautiful home. It sounds like a Hallow shoot.
Thank you guys so much, and welcome to my little office.
It's lovely.
Yeah.
I mean, every therapist has got to have an office like this. It's got reassuring books.
Reassuring books. And, you know, sometimes I always felt when I was in my analysis and I was going to see my analyst and looking at all of her books, those titles gave me a lot of insight into what we were doing.
I agree. It's big.
Oh,
big.
dear, Hazel, I think we might have to.
Hazel's active. This is the role of the unconscious we're going to talk about today. So you said, look, we're going to have Hazel because she's going to literally mirror some of the conversations, and we're going to analyse her unconscious today, look at her instincts, and understand her more. And also, you have a horse.
I do. Yeah. I do.
You have more than one horse for this.
That's a very special one. That was made for me by a gentleman in New York City who was homeless at the time, and I was a dressage instructor at the Claremont Riding Academy on 89th in Amsterdam.
There's an actual riding academy.
There was. It's no longer.
Right. Is that Manhattan?
In Manhattan.
You're kidding me.
On 89th in Amsterdam. And he met me and the horse I was riding, and he made that for me.
Wow. And it's standing behind your sort of reassuring certificate.
Yes.
Like, every analyst has got to have a reassuring certificate.
You have to have a reassuring certificate.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely.
Well done. And it's actually for 10 metres swimming, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. When I was 5.
Exactly. Well done. We've talked about how important emotion is. Can we just go back? I like to sort of root it in how we know each other.
Sure.
Because I think it's important. Can you remember how we know each other? Because I can.
Oh, you can remember.
Do you remember how, yeah?
Okay, well, I feel we met through your wife, Katie.
Yeah. And your husband, Richard.
And, well, so our significant others were at university together. And after I moved back over here after a few years of being away, I met Katie through Richard, and then subsequently met you.
We've talked a lot every time we get together about your incredible love of, experience of, and now practice of Jungian thinking. It's something that some people love. Some people think they know Jung. Some people are practitioners. Some people don't know Jung at all, actually. But if I could just explain to you why I'm so excited in this, and then you're going to do a lot more speaking. But when I was writing Winning Not Fighting, having practiced Wing Chun and trying to put into a book the 4 doors of Wing Chun, you kindly alerted me to the power of Jung and how applicable it would be to the book. And when I wrote it, and you did help me along the way, you pointed me to the Yolanda Jacobi to Murray Steen, who is, I guess, a modern day, I guess, one of the leading authors in this space. You kindly sent me an email saying, I feel so, you've done such a brilliant job of applying Jung and understanding Jung. And then when I said I was doing a paper about you went, oh, good, because there's quite a lot you got wrong.
Well, it was really around the transference.
Was it? Okay.
It was more just giving a more balanced view of the transference. What you weren't wrong. It was more that it needed to be filled out.
Thank you. Well, let's fill it out today. Thank you for that. Let's fill it out in the paper bag. So may I start with the question, which is, how are you?
I am really well, thank you.
Let's start with a basic question, which is, how would you describe yourself professionally? What's your title, your role, your profession now?
So I am a Jungian psychoanalyst. I can also call myself an analytical psychologist or a psychotherapist.
And are all those things the same thing, or are they different roles you're describing?
They're all, actually, a Jungian psychoanalyst and an analytical psychologist are the same thing.
It's just one happens to reflect the root in, which is Jung, and the other one is more of a generic thing. But the third term?
It's just a psychotherapist. I mean, you can, sort of, clinically, you can call yourself a psychotherapist if that's what you wanted to.
And as a basic differentiation for people watching who aren't, familiar with mental health, a psychiatrist versus a psychotherapist. Let's deal with that basic difference.
Well, a psychiatrist is a medically trained doctor who will have the task of diagnosing and prescribing for certain conditions.
How would you describe to a lay person what Jungian psychology is?
Oh my God.
And by the way, this is like, I have to preface this by saying, oh my God, poor you, trying to describe Jungian. I mean, it's so complex and complicated and mystical and layered. But so sorry to ask the question. But
no.
How would you describe God?
Yeah, it's a little bit like that. Well, although let's not get too inflated. Let's not get too inflated,
exactly.
But because
it's that complex, not necessarily that obvious.
Which is always the danger with Jung, is to fight inflation when one's a Jungian analyst as well. Jungian analysis, say, versus a more traditional psychotherapy, and this is what relates to your central theme of wholeness, is we are treating the psyche as a whole. And we are looking at the different parts that make up the psyche and trying to create balance within it. So whilst there is a therapeutic element to it, of course there is, this is a journey that Jung called individuation, which is trying to find an alignment of our conscious life and our unconscious life. The ego, which is consciousness, and our shadow, which is our unconscious.
When we're talking about individuation as a process, we are really talking about Jung's theory of the union of opposites, which was central to his idea of depth psychology. And it's a lifelong process of becoming whole. And the union of opposites refers to the integration of conflicting aspects of the psyche, such as consciousness and the unconscious, masculine and feminine, good and evil, light and shadow. The human psyche is full of polarities, and these opposites often exist in tension and cause inner conflict within us. And so when we're looking to create a union between these polarities, it's not that we want to eliminate one side or the other. It's that we want to bring them into balance, that they're more synthesized with each other. And therefore, there is less conflict within ourselves.
So we're trying to create a balance between the two so that we aren't living totally consciously or totally unconsciously.
I find that incredibly powerful, and it's relevant to me at this point, hopefully to people watching and listening to this, because there's an argument that we've created a society which is overly reliant on the rational mind, and that we train the rational mind in studies. We impart knowledge or skills. And it's, I think, I mean, some people would say we don't go far enough in terms of teaching critical thinking, but perhaps we're a society that has lost touch with our instinct and with our unconscious. But balancing those two is so vital, because people can go the other way, can't they? They can totally be so in instinctive situation that they forget the rational.
Absolutely.
They forget the control of that rational and the balance. One thing about nomenclature on ego, because I think Jungian psychology defines ego slightly differently from the way that we did, for example, in the book. Am I right in thinking that ego, as you say, it is conscious, but it sort of bridges the conscious and the unconscious? If I look at that diagram within the Yolanda Jacobi book, she's sort of got a circle with conscious and unconscious, and the ego being at the center, trying to bridge the two.
Yes, because obviously consciousness can go into the unconscious.
Okay.
So it is the bridge to
interesting.
To the unconscious. How we access the unconscious is through our ego, which is the center of consciousness in Jungian terminology.
Just to describe the difference that other people can use, and I, in the book, we have used, Julian and I, ego is more to differentiate it from true self. So we tend to say that there is a true self, which is innate, loving, reflects spirit, us, and soul. I know they're very different in Jungian terminology. Whereas the ego is the insecurities, the shame, the anger, or the fear, which is our ego self, which can be like our chimp self, or the self that is insecure, the self which is not as powerful and innate as the true self. So we use ego more in a negative context,
yeah.
Whereas you use it in a different sense, which is this center of the
It's totally neutral.
Psyche.
It's
yes,
totally
exactly,
neutral.
Yes.
And what you're describing, you know, we would the sort of parsing we would do in the Jungian sense is that we would say that shame, that those aspects that you're talking about tend to be in the unconscious,
right? Yes,
and held in the shadow,
100%,
and hidden behind the persona,
100%.
which is the mask that we present to the world.
So in the book, this shouldn't be a conversation about we're not fighting, but I think that it is worth just us getting the language and the structure set up, which is that we would tend to say that we talk about in the book the Enneagram, and we say that the Enneagram reflects that persona, that mask. So we would say, and I'd love to see how this corresponds to your Jungian thinking, which is the Enneagram is really the shame or the anger or the fear, the lack of feeling not perfect enough, the lack of not being successful enough, the fear of being controlled or harmed by others, in my case, an 8, the fear of being bored. All of those fears are mostly learned fears that create that persona, that mask, from Latin and Greek, persona, mask, which is our personality, which is our self-defense mechanism between our true self and the outside world.
Yeah.
That's how we use it. And we kind of associate that persona with our ego, with those fears that are learned. But just to be clear, again, it's neutral. The word ego is not neutral. A negative thing here.
Absolutely not. It is absolutely not.
People to understand that. Thank you. So carry on with your explanation. It's great of individuation and Jungian.
Right. So in the process of individuation, we begin to explore with the client, the analysand as they are sometimes known, the processes and behaviors that are being driven unconsciously. And that is a very slow, delicate process, because the power of the unconscious is enormous. It is much more powerful than the ego. Ego has a foothold in consciousness, but the pull of the unconscious is very, very, very strong. And it is through repetitive work that we start to create a therapeutic alliance with the client. We don't necessarily go straight in on the unconscious stuff right away, because that's just, it's too much in your face.
Yeah.
It's too much energy to deal with right away. And most people, when faced with the unconscious in their initial encounter with it, is one of horror, actually.
What, to know that it exists, or to reality of what?
Just the power of
peeling
it,
back?
and so people tend to reject it and say, no, that's not for me.
It's not my identity.
It's not my identity. It's not for me. So we have to be very, very careful how we work with our clients. And initially, we're taking, a sort of an overview of their past, so we can understand certain relationships and so on as we go through, and then how events and relationships in their lives have impacted their psyche, and have produced what you call a coping mechanism. The persona is a coping mechanism. And looking behind that persona at what is going on psychologically. So I started on this journey with my analyst, Melanie, who was very patient with me, and it took me many years to get to the point where I could affect change within myself, because my internal defense structures were very strong. We started working, she didn't talk to me about archetypes and individuation or anything like that. We just started working with my dreams. I had what we would call in the work an initial dream. The first dream I brought to her. And that was, I was in my grandmother's house. I'm walking up a stairwell that is sort of circumambulating around a central void. And the house is wood. And coming up from this central void is a massive fire. And that's the extent of the dream. But it is what I would call probably an archetypal dream. Archetypes are our inherited instincts. Jung sort of formulated this idea that we, through the collective unconscious, which was his big breakthrough theory and what caused the great split with Freud, the collective unconscious has these strong archetypal figures that we relate to through archetypal images or symbols. And in my dream, there's a sense of moving from the bottom upwards. So from the unconscious into the consciousness. And there's this fire at the center, which is representative of the alchemical fire that we talk about in Jungian theory, which is a very important part of the healing process. It is through two elements coming together that they are changed. And so this dream pointed to me towards my connection to my ancestors, and I am ascending from a deep collective into the personal. From the unconscious, the deep primordial, to higher consciousness. So this was my initial dream, and this reflected the analytical process. This is obviously deeply personal material, but what I want to portray is that I went from a very deeply unconscious state where I was often in the grip of my complexes, which is another Jungian term for parts of our psyche that have been affected by trauma or long exposure to certain behaviors that will create a split off part of our psyche that become autonomous. And they are sort of free floating out there, but every so often they get constellated triggered by some event or something that happens psychologically that awakens them. And then they take over.
Okay.
And they are autonomous parts of our psyche that are deeply unconscious, in that we don't know we have the complex. The complex has us.
So what you're describing now is as a complex.
Yeah.
And when you describe it as something which is a split-off part of our personality, obviously any graphical model that we use to describe that is insufficient, because it doesn't really reflect the multi-dimensional quantum nature of our psyche. But if you were to sort of try and create a model for that, so we've got our consciousness, we've got our unconsciousness, we've got the ego that tries to span between the two. This is something which is a coherent but trauma-led set of ideas that are caused by some sort of upset, but which then we confuse with our own identity, or they start to control our own identity.
They control our behaviors.
Oh, behaviors, yeah. Okay.
Our behaviors, not necessarily our identity, but it will take over our behaviors.
It becomes almost a virus if you're talking about software update, or it's like a software virus that gets in, run a program
I suppose
like an algorithm which starts to run a program instead of behaviors,
and it's taken, and that program takes over the whole program.
Yes. I'm sitting here right now. I feel lovely to be here. Am I potentially being driven by a complex right now that I'm unaware of, or do we have a whole bunch of complexes that could be activated at any point?
The likelihood of you being in a complex right now is low, I would have thought, because this is not a situation that is high pressure. Although I do believe podcasts are ripe for the constellation of complexes and inflation, for sure. But
Let's talk about that later.
We can talk about that. But I think, no, the also, I know you very well, and I would expect you, if you were in a complex, for you to be behaving quite differently.
Does any one person have a whole bunch of about to be or potentially activated complexes?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We can't exist without complexes, actually. They're split off parts of our psyche that we hope over time to integrate back into the self. The self being the big overall part of the psyche. And then these are all different components within the self. But we have positive and negative complexes, and they can be both a hindrance and a help to us. So we have to, we work with complexes.
Is it all of those stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves that create complexes, and also our complex is also the elastoplast, the responses to traumatic incidents that have taken place? How would you describe the gamut of things?
It's not you telling yourself over time that let's just use.
You don't rationally tell you or make up the stories.
So let's just use an inferiority complex.
Yeah, please,
something that people can relate to and have heard lots about over time. So and so has an inferiority complex. So that inferiority complex can be born from long exposure to, say, criticism, how they performed academically at school. Parental criticisms, so on and so forth, can create within the mind an inferiority complex. Now, that complex exists at all times within the psyche, but it's not always activated. When the person with an inferiority complex that's, let's say, born out of academic failure or critique, okay, then when that person is then in a situation where they have to perform academically or speak academically or so on, they might get in the grip of the complex. You will find that their language becomes slightly stilted. Their facial
stutter.
They can stutter. They can, because it's creating a psychological block. And has taken over in that moment. But what we also have to understand is, an inferiority complex in somebody has its shadow side. It has its opposite in the psyche as well. So somebody with an inferiority complex, you're going to think, oh gosh, psychologically they think they're really, and they can't perform, they're dumb or whatever. But the flip side of that is inflation and grandiosity. So both are held within the psyche.
It's classic, isn't it, to see someone that is quite grand.
Yes.
Actually, that's driven by an insecurity often, or
The perfect example of that, let's just say somebody has a very grand persona, a really grand, they have a real superiority complex, right?
It looks like they do, yeah.
It looks like they do.
Yeah.
So the perfect example of that is, say, the Wizard of Oz.
Okay.
So, you have this big, powerful figure, all powerful, both benevolent and cruel. And
extending their energy outwards, really.
Extending their energy outwards, absolutely. But behind that is the little man behind the curtain who's blustering and doesn't know what he's doing and is nervous, and it's just a little person. If you were to flip that and make him the inferiority complex, the reverse is this big, grandiose.
In Enneagram terms, that sounds consistent with the Enneagram 8, which is the challenger, which can be Saddam Hussein or Nelson Mandela, actually. So they can either be very magnanimous, like Nelson Mandela often was, or they can be very vindictive, like sometimes like that Saddam Hussein was. We think that someone like Trump has that sort of Enneagram 8 energy, which is someone wanting to not be harmed by others, wanting to control their environment, impose their energy on the world around them. And that is, however, just driven by a fear, and driven by a fear of actually being harmed by others, controlled by others. And so the shadow really is the seeing the fact that the behaviors are actually driven by something that looks like the opposite. And that our persona, in Enneagram terms, our personality, is actually the product of our true self not being fed enough in a certain way.
Well,
is that the same in Jungian terms or not?
No, it's not about being fed enough. It's about the persona is built around societal norms and what society will accept of us. And, different societies, different personas, different parts of society, different personas. We all feel that we have to present, a balanced, kind, intelligent persona.
We being in this culture, you mean?
In this culture, this culture. But when I was first learning about persona, one of the parts of society that I studied was the sicarios in Central and South America, and their personas. This incredible, powerful, violent persona that was highly masculine and there to create fear.
And
right?
that was their norm.
That was their norm. That was, the sicarios, the assassins of the drug gangs. These people had, their personas had to appear very, very frightening. So, of course, in the shadow, what is there? Well, actually, quite feminine energy. All of these men are absolutely enthralled to their mamas.
You get sometimes in the best gangster movies, that juxtaposition of the assassin
versus
versus
the little boy at home type of.
In often those movies, they save the dog or they save the cat, and it's that window into that shadow.
That's the window into
assassin.
that shadow.
Yeah,
exactly. So persona is not something that hasn't been fed to you. It's something that society has told you is unacceptable.
I guess if I can clarify my language to see whether there is a reconciliation here, which is that within the thesis in the Enneagram is that, as I say, it represents the personality, the mask that we've put on to protect ourselves from the outside world.
Indeed.
And so what you're describing there is the fact that is not just initiated by our experiences, it's the interface between our true self, which is innate, and that outside world. And what you're describing is that the outside world differs by culture, and therefore that outside world is it's a relationship between that constant relationship between the outside world and our own true self that then creates that mask, because we cope. Or that,
I think cope is a perfectly good word.
It allows us to cope in that situation, in that culture.
Yeah.
And the fed bit, what I meant was, I guess, that it's the things that have happened to us in our lifetime that have maybe inherited, but probably in our lifetime, that point our personality into a certain way. Some people will be driven by a sense of shame, some people by a sense of anger, or some generic fear. And it's by fed, what I mean is, it's our experiences that have created, maybe not fed, have created our own particular insecurities. Our own particular insecurities that feed our persona, that feed our personality. That's the thesis of the Enneagram. And I'm not trying to put it in Jungian terms, but I'm just wondering, is that reconcilable at all?
I mean, I think that there is some reconciliation there for sure. We build our personas as we experience the world. And it is through our personal experience of both personal experience and collective experiences that but it is what we decide unconsciously that we can present, whatever our persona is, that's what's going to be acceptable to other people.
Acceptable and to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really fast. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think so, absolutely.
So can we talk briefly about who Jung was? Because, and this isn't a history lesson, and it's not a test, but my really simple understanding is that Freud was like really sort of like, the 20th century saw really a big advancement of psychotherapy greats. And it was the sort of early to mid 20th century was an explosion in our understanding.
Absolutely.
Now, maybe it also inherited a lot from previous civilizations as well. Yeah, how because in a way it's all about the 20th century, and in a way it's actually quite
it's ancient. It's ancient as well. I mean, I have always felt like Jung was the culmination. He was almost like, to me, I always have this sort of image of him as a valve, of which, at a certain point, all the pressures, all the sort of discoveries and thoughts and
it's like
so
the
on.
middle of an hourglass.
Yeah, and he arrived, and through him, I mean, look at all the output he had. I mean, he the black books, the red book, and I haven't read all of it by any stretch of the imagination, because it's just so vast.
That's a very good metaphor by the stretch of the imagination. That's really good.
His early life, his very introverted early life, definitely created an incredible environment for a mind like his. His mind is definitely, a sort of once in a generation type of mind. And I don't
that challenges convention, questions
absolutely
convention.
Challenges convention, and when. I mean, sometimes trying to understand Jung, makes your brain feel like it's being squeezed, because the concepts can be so opaque. And even there are plenty of things that I still just, I have to reread, and I still am not quite sure what he's getting at. But his early life as an introverted child, with a father who was a pastor, and a mother who was, let's say, a delicate mental disposition, who would be gone for long periods of time. That has a very big influence, upon the psyche. But it created within him someone who was able to live both in this world and in the unconscious. He had a relationship with the unconscious that was very unusual at a very young age. And where his intuition took him that was so unique.
Yeah. You have to be, if I can draw an analogy between him and Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci was gay, left-handed, illegitimate, and uneducated. And the thesis with Leonardo da Vinci is that if he had been not illegitimate, he would have been a notary, and he would have been within that system. If he hadn't have been gay, he would have been married and maybe had kids and not been able to, work as hard on things. By being gay, he had a different perspective from some of the straight society. By being uneducated, he wasn't overly rationalized in knowledge, and he had access to his intuition still. And I think that sometimes these outliers in society are the ones that can provide an amazing lens that those people living conventionally don't see. Because if I look at the Toltec tradition that say we are possessed by a dream, which is really the conventions that we're taught and domesticated around, sometimes these people can see the dream that society, or the convention that society is controlled by, because they aren't controlled by it as much, and they can see it, and they look around themselves and they think everyone seems to be controlled by this convention that I don't buy into. So you have to sometimes be a bit of an outlier.
Oh no, he's without a doubt, and he suffered. He suffered for that as well. I mean, with all the powerful thinking he did, he brought himself very, if not into illness, so close to illness. And I mean, he calls it he experienced a creative illness. He had to go deeper into the unconscious to really understand its power and what it was directing him towards.
We're going to really get onto the main thesis now, which is in a minute, which is the amazing essay, and was it a dissertation?
Well, I didn't do a PhD, so we call it a long essay.
Okay. You did a very long essay, which is a very long essay.
It's very long.
Did you have an essay crisis? It's very good. Before we get into that, just your experience then. So just to recap, you were a client of somebody, and then you decided to train. At what point did you know, this is for me, this is my thing?
This is my thing. Well, that was, it sort of snuck up on me. So I had been in analysis for a number of years. Let's say, what was it, 20?
Feel free, by the way, to elucidate on the response that you had. So I think I might have not allowed you yet to describe that, which is, what was the resulting, how did you find the therapy? What impact did it have on you?
Initially I just sort of was very unconscious as I was entering, and I didn't really know what I was doing. And then I think it slowly, I think that dream that I explained to you about this, it was like, oh no, this is something very important and I need to pursue this. And I did, as an analysand for many years. And then I was speaking with my analyst about an experience that I had that was an encounter with the unconscious, that as an extrovert, very counter to my typology, I became extremely introverted.
Which can happen under stress, right?
Which
can go
absolutely,
to the
absolutely.
Yeah.
And this was a product of it was a PTSD.
Yeah.
So I went into this very introverted state for about 2 years, where I had this encounter. And, I was functioning, I was getting on with my daily life, but I was absolutely consumed with this internal world. And that was when my analyst said, I really think you should look at doing the introductory course at the Guild of Analytical Psychologists. So I did. I applied in 2014, and I started to familiarize myself with the Jungian concepts, some of which I've explained today. And I found within myself, it was a spiritual response to the work. It was a quickening within me. I felt something moving, what we call libido, not in the Freudian term. It has no sexual or negative or positive content.
Energetic movement.
It's just energy. Yeah. It's just energy, psychic energy.
Yeah.
And I felt myself what I felt was actually neurons and neuroplasticity at work. Actually, I was making connections.
Absolutely.
And my brain was firing. When you do the introductory course, they often ask you if you would be interested in doing a Jungian training, because that's what they offer at the Guild. And, as I was being carried along by the material, I could feel something shifting inside me where I felt drawn to the work. And, I don't want to sound too inflated, but it is a calling. There is a point where you feel a certain momentum towards something you can't stop.
Yeah.
And that's what happened with me, is I got dragged, sometimes kicking and screaming into this work, because it's so hard. It's really hard to learn. And also the discoveries that one makes about oneself are really also very difficult. As we've been talking about shadow, when you have an encounter with the shadow, with you truly understand your shadow self, that is some really, really dark material. And it is, let's say icky. Icky is, it's sticky, icky, horrible, primordial stuff. But even that, you start to see sort of the light that you shine on it. You can see the treasure within it. So then I applied to the course, and I had to take a year between applying and starting the course to finish up some hours. You had to have a requirement of 150 hours of analysis to apply. And so I made that up, and I started in 2016. The way the course works at the Guild is you do 3 years of theory, and then you go into clinical practice after having done an observational placement with a psychiatrist.
And you had to study within what environment? Did you practice within what environment? Was it a clinical environment, a similar clinical environment, or where did you practice?
On the placement, that's you're in a clinical environment. I was in a hospital.
Yeah. Which hospital?
The Highgate Mental Health Center.
You mentioned that earlier. Yes.
Yeah. And I was an acute ward. It was at the time men and women. It was an excellent ward, but of course, when you're dealing with acute mental health issues, you can imagine it was also a very volatile situation. It was there that I encountered someone who really changed my attitude towards the work, in that I started to see exactly what this work can do in terms of affecting people who are very, very unwell, and give a sense of much more connectedness. This one client this one patient on the ward, I saw, as I worked with them, a real change in attitude. Yeah, and this is obviously in conjunction with medicines and, proper medical intervention as well. This was not just...
But let's not say that yours isn't proper medical intervention.
No, it is proper medical intervention.
You mean drugs?
I agree.
Drugs as well is what you mean.
Yeah.
But
this work affects you both mentally and physically. There is some intervention, absolutely an intervention there. But then the work that I started to do with clients was, I started in lockdown, so it was all online. Right. And as someone who started their practice online, I have seen great changes being affected through work online. It's wonderful to be in person as well, but the work online can be extremely, is very effective.
Good.
Yeah.
So your experience of it led you seamlessly, it seems, or you're on a path towards really practicing it. What results have you seen? Is there anyone who has given consent?
Yes.
You can explain some of the impacts that people have experienced.
Yes, I have a couple of clients who have consented to me using...
for us to know that.
Yeah, absolutely, that has been given to use their material in this podcast. One of the clients is a woman, I call her anonymously Rebecca, that is not her real name. She came to me with some severe psychological issues and some severe physical issues. And she presented as very unconnected to her body and mind. She was one very lost woman, and she would absolutely, to this day, she would admit all of that. This is work that we've gone over many times, and she had very strong parental complexes, and so much so that she became what we would call a Cinderella type figure to her family, whereby she did all the work, but was utterly neglected.
By work, you mean physically around the house? Or
Around the house,
provide,
providing emotional support,
Right,
physical support,
right.
all sorts, to the point where this woman, who had 3 children of her own, was not living in her own home, but was living in her parents' home so that she could look after them and her and another sibling who lived nearby who was an addict. Over many, we've worked together over many years, took the time to really do the work on understanding her complexes. And this was very painful work for her, and required extraordinary psychic energy on her part, because so much of her behaviors were unconscious. And there were many times in the analysis where I was very fearful for her safety. I was very fearful for her physical safety. And I was often imploring her to leave the situation, but I found that she wouldn't. And then finally, there was a catastrophic event that was so dangerous, that was so frightening to her and to me, that it pierced all the complexes. And I was finally able to say, you must leave. You must leave now. And she did. But she said it was the complexes were so strong that even as she was preparing to leave, she kept thinking, I'm not going to leave. I'm not going to leave. But she just
carried on.
She carried on, and she did leave. And she left. And over the next year, well, the moment she left, she stopped drinking. Never drank again. And then over the next year, as we were going on with this material, she lost 9.5 stone.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it just shows you, that we carry the physicality of
No,
protection,
absolutely.
don't we?
Oh no, I mean, absolutely. And I would really like to, so, we work with dreams.
Yeah.
We worked with a lot of dreams, and there were many dreams over the years. And the dream that I would like to read to you today, and the subsequent analysis of it, I will also read that, is to show you how the integration of the complexes and the integration of the unconscious, how it brings balance to psyche, and how that is, we find in the symbolism of dreams.
Okay.
This is the dream itself. I was having a session with you, only I wasn't sitting down as usual. I was bustling about the room. I was talking to you all the while, but was very occupied with what I was doing, which appeared to involve carrying dusty stones or coals, quite sizable, like small jacket potatoes. I was very occupied with them. I think they had something to do with the fireplace, as I was busying myself in front of it. After a while of rather intense activity, I suddenly put them down on the hearth. I had one in each hand, and walked back to where you were and took my seat. Everything around me stilled and became quiet. It felt like a breath of fresh air. It hadn't been there before when I was bustling about. We started talking to each other. It was incredibly peaceful. I felt myself relax and my mind calmed. I looked at you and said something along the lines of, "It's really nice to just sit and talk, isn't it?" So here's the analysis of the dream. So this is from my point of view now. I believe this was a significant dream as it shows just how far Rebecca has come in her personal ego self-development. There's a feeling of bustling familiarity at the start of the dream as she gathers the dusty coal stones that are like jacket potatoes. Cinderella also has to busy herself in the coal cinders of the hearth. Cinderella represents to me the soul trapped in a consciousness that has been cut off from the perception of the unconscious. The cinders, cold, deprived of heat and light, are like the emotional landscape unilluminated by archetypal energy and numinosity. How can she transition from childhood into womanhood without the guidance and wisdom of her mother? The appearance of the wise old woman, in whatever form she takes, arrives when there is great need on the part of the hero or heroine. My presence in the room close to the heart symbolizes the wise old woman and her transcendent role. Rebecca has potato-like coals in each hand, and she's, in a sense, balanced. Edinger, one of a Jungian academic, emphasizes this in The Anatomy of the Psyche. Quote, "The term philosopher's stone is itself a union of opposites. Philosophy, love of wisdom, a spiritual endeavor, whereas stone is crude, hard, material reality. The term thus suggests something like the concrete practical efficacy of wisdom in consciousness. It is a stone that is not a stone. The coal as a purifying fire leads us to the alchemical transformation of analysis, and potatoes are representation not only of poverty, but also of talismanic power, as they were once carried around in pockets until they turned hard and black like coal. Paucity is transformed into hope." So that gives you a sense of what it is to analyze a dream.
Fantastic.
But it also...
Literally fantastic, or maybe not fantastic.
Well, it is, you know, I find that a deeply spiritual dream, a deeply spiritual dream. And it came after many years of hardship, of really hard fought consciousness from someone who had been so deeply unconscious that her body had to take over the role of protecting her. And she often felt in danger before she was able to escape back to her own home.
Your explanation of the dream, it's, am I right in saying that it coincides her own experiences of her own life, and your description of what you might call the archetypes reflects this inherited and collective set of ideas, which, so you're able to draw upon other stories in our culture or in related cultures where the same kind of story has represented the same idea and energy.
Indeed.
So
this
that's
is the archetype.
An explanation
this is
of the two, yeah. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So these common themes that we see coming through.
It's the collective. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Commonality, collective, however you want to term it. But you know, these are the Cinderella story is ancient. I mean, I can't remember the first time it has been found, but there, you know, and it is across all cultures.
And it's even like, sorry, this is not meant to be anti-religious at all.
No.
But even like the Christ story clearly is found repeated in different civilizations.
Absolutely.
Or the prodigal son, or the savior son, the ugly old evil woman, and the beautiful pure virgin woman. All of these. Am I right in thinking, Ness, that because they're so ingrained in us and our cultures and what we inherit at birth, this is almost like when you get your iPhone from a shop, it comes with an operating system. And then you can decide to add apps afterwards. And is it almost like the collective unconscious is the operating system you inherit?
It's your inherited instincts.
Yeah.
They're universal inherited patterns or symbols that reside in the collective unconscious. They're also our instincts.
So something like, so an archetype is this idea of, I mean, good and evil is an archetype, right? Even that understanding of there's like in fairy tales, there's the goodie and the baddie, there's the hero and and I guess
the hero's an archetype.
And if we talk about the press and we talk about the thing we're not fighting, it's like victim, villain, hero. It's like SAS war hero rescues poor old lady from nasty, evil villain who was mugging her. So we see the sort of villain, victim, hero, for example, archetypes, and even the press, certainly our storytelling of fiction, but often our storytelling of reality falls into these archetypes. And sometimes even the journalists may not realize that they are.
But that's how they want to
those,
make them relatable. And it's through archetypes that we can relate across cultures. And
they're true. And what's so fascinating is that, you know, to try and describe this in the NHS, if you're in Highgate Hospital,
at the Highgate Mental Health
Hospital, you probably have to fill out some forms that, you know, there's one doctor over here saying, I prescribed this drug and I expect this results. And you're like, no, I dealt with the Cinderella, she wasn't at Highgate, but I dealt with I explained the Cinderella archetype. And sometimes the psychiatrist might be like, you what? I just gave her some drugs. Do you know what I mean? That we know we have randomized control trials for. And here you are telling us all this stuff. And I think people watching this need to realize how true, how powerful, how real these are in our everyday lives. And just because they're not.
Absolutely. And also, you know, what I was trying to illustrate in the dream is in the dream, I am the wise old woman. I am not, I'm not, you know, I'm a woman who's aging, but I'm not, you know, am I particularly wise? I don't know. You know, I have picked up some wisdom along the way.
I think you're wise and old.
But I'm wise and old. But this image for her is an internal image.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's an internal image that she is relating to. Then through the dream gives the symbol that she can give meaning to, that then engenders consciousness and understanding within herself. Meaning. It gives meaning.
I mean, we talk, you know, we're not fighting about the how small the power of the conscious is versus the unconscious. And you said this before. We talk about this idea of My Big Fat Greek Wedding, which was this film where the guy running the family thinks he's in charge of the family, but actually he's just controlled by all of the people around him. The conscious brain likes to think it's in charge, doesn't it?
Oh my God, yeah.
But it's not.
Nope.
Yeah. And so it's this idea of, I mean, we did this experiment when we were writing the book, which is, they said, press this button whenever you want to. You decide, but press this button whenever you want it. And when they looked at the scans of the brain, they realized it was the unconscious that made the decision first. And then after they pressed the button, the conscious brain activated because it wanted to convince itself that it made the decision. So the conscious brain that was my idea, to press the button. But actually it was the unconscious that drove everything. And that's what you were describing. It's a window into that unconscious, the dream. It's a small bubbling up of that unconscious that made visible.
Yeah.
And that's what she experienced and you interpreted.
Yeah.
And you do this all the time. You do this for a living. What the hell? Wow. And so what happened as a result of this with this client?
Yeah, I have enormous respect and admiration for this client because of the effort that she has put into this work over the years. And it has been at times at great cost to her psychologically, because you are dealing with very powerful forces. You are dealing with some terrible things, and confronting those things can be really terrifying.
Anyone can do it, but be prepared for some problematic work. It's hard work.
It's hard.
Yeah.
Like, it is very hard. And it's, you know, and we're not, you know, this isn't results-driven work. You will get results from it, but this is a journey of individuation. It is about bringing consciousness and the unconscious into alignment.
And just to clarify your phrase, it's not results-driven work. What you're saying is you're not shooting for an output shooting for a shortcutted output. You're not going, look, let's deliver the results, let's shortcut it, because actually what you're having to fundamentally deal with is something fundamental and something which can be longitudinal, can take time, and something which actually requires you to keep the results in your mind's eye in a kind of oblique way, knowing that you will get there, but you don't focus on the results. You focus on the fact that you have to get the result through the wholeness, through the individuation.
Through the wholeness.
So you're always looking at that as the output, as the process.
Right. And this client, if I were to ask her today, do you feel whole? She'd probably be like, no. But she feels a lot more whole.
What I love about Jung, he talks about examples of things that happen in his sessions that go beyond synchronicity. So I think one, he talked about a woman who she was skeptical about the idea of synchronicity, and she was describing a brooch or something, and then a scarab beetle came in the room, which was almost identical to her brooch, and that was an opportunity for Jung to explain synchronicity. So it's interesting. We won't go there necessarily, but that's a synchronicity.
I've got a synchronicity dream all lined up.
Good.
No, I do synchronistically.
Well, that was a great.
Synchronistically.
Well, there we go. So what gives carry on then?
Well,
Vanessa?
so this is another client who has also given her consent. This is a dream where this shows where synchronicity gives meaning to the symbolic.
And just break on symbol. So if archetype is the idea, the inherited energy, the structure, a symbol that doesn't necessarily need to be symbolic, but it can be symbolic. And the symbol is putting that archetype into something that you could almost draw or engrave or something.
The symbol,
like the cross or a circle or something like that.
Yeah,
is that right?
The symbol is the archetypal motif.
Yes. It's the logo for the archetype.
And so, for instance, the circle with a cross through it, which I use in my long essay, is a symbol for the self.
Yep.
And the more generalized the archetype, the more of the symbol will be very simple, but will hold more powerful meaning as a result of it. And we'll be able to hold multiple meanings within it as well.
Thank you.
So this is a client called Sarah, and this was a dream that she had fairly early on in the work, where she was working with unconscious material, dream material, but she was skeptical. She wasn't quite on board. So this is her dream. My saliva and poop had worms in it. I was very stressed about the worms. I kept asking people what I should do about the worms. They were small and white. I could sort of see them under my skin. I was so stressed. Now I'm reading the analysis. The day after having had this dream, Sarah was walking along the pavement by her house and saw a worm. She was immediately struck by the synchronicity of this image, and it amplified her sense of meaning in this dream. And while she felt embarrassed by some of the imagery, she was surprised and heartened by the interpretation work we did on the dream. She had felt stressed by the grossness of the dream. However, she made associations that were very positive in terms of her own development. Worms were a part of childhood for her. They spoke to her of growth, rebirth, and springtime. She also saw the worms moving under her skin as a symbol of her anger being cleansed from her body. The shadow element of worms can be seen as good for the soul as they eat and metabolize the rotten and leave fertile soil for growth. Again, we see here that the role of shame can be harnessed by the unconscious to help rather than just cause retreat into further fantasy. For it is the excrement that shows us how valuable this dream might be. As Jung points out in Symbols of Transformation, there is, and I quote, an intimate connection between excrement and gold. The lowest value allies itself to the highest. The alchemists sought their prima materia in excrement. So this client, who was gently resistant to the work, not, but, there was a lot of resistance there. Seeing this worm on the pavement caused a connection within her that gave that dream meaning. And then the analysis really kicked in. At this point, she's starting to make connections herself. Her own inner analyst is starting to be engaged. And she's starting to understand herself.
So did she interpret her dream before you did?
Well, we
or
interpreted
did you
it together.
So it was a dialogue in which she participated with the
but she had the
interpretation.
dream, saw the worm, then the interpretation.
And in the word synchronicity, it can, it's more straight down the line, Jungian psychologists use it in your sense, which is it's a perceived link. It's something where the connection is made between one person and the other. But Jung occasionally, I don't want to go into this now, but it's fair to say that Jung, people are unsure about whether Jung took it further, about whether Jung said that we in our lifetime have repeated patterns or repeated experiences that are actually slightly more cosmically linked. And there's an argument that he and Einstein had what you might call more metaphysical conversations about whether there's something happen at an energetic quantum level which creates that. And I know that Jung can be taken into that territory as well. But
yes, he can go into the, absolutely. I mean, if you're talking about sort of on a different plane.
Yes, whether perhaps, if the past, present, and future are happening at the same time, or whether we are in a universe which is where there's some sort of energetic exchange or energetic link out of space and time. He was, I think, intrigued by that. And at the same time, he's a clinic that the NHS use for pretty routine stuff. And yet, like Einstein, he had these pretty far out thoughts that don't necessarily got taught in GCSE.
As far as he's concerned, what happens in psyche is psychic reality. It is real, and there are evidence-based reasons for believing a lot of his theory.
Is there anything you'd like to say about the journey of this second client?
What I would say, yes. I mean, she is also still a client, and as you may have gathered, this is long-term work. It becomes like a very long conversation. It is an analysis. It is a long analysis. This client has also, I say that's not results driven, but there have been a lot of results.
Yeah.
She changed her job. She's changed her job a number of times, but, has really gone up, really changed her circumstances.
Right.
Very much changed her circumstances materially.
Yeah.
Her through this, through a lot of different things, but I think through this work, she has started to understand certain things about herself. She values herself much more, although there's still work to be done on that. And I think, she would readily admit to that there's still work to be done. But she is someone who interacts with the material in a very lively way, which is a very big difference to how she was when she first presented, which was very numb and very stuck. And there is a lot of change that has happened in her life since we started working together. Most of that has been extremely positive. I mean, she's had a lot of hardships along the way, a lot of hardships. She's had to endure a lot. But she is enduring. She is much more resilient. But to my mind, more interestingly and importantly, she's much more adaptable. That's what I really think that this work, through all these stages of working with people, is to create a mind and a psyche that is agile, can interpret and react to situations in a way that is very adaptable.
We talk about that even in food. And physically, we talk about physical adaptability. You can go from being in a fasted state to being in a feasted state. You've got this ability to flex, and rather than being stuck. And in Taoist terms, it's about not being so much like a rigid oak tree, stark, self-protected, but actually being more like bamboo and being able to flex.
That's exactly how I think about it.
Yeah.
Because resilience to me is static.
Oh, I don't like the word resilience.
I don't like it either.
No, when people say we're training in resilience, I'm like, really? You're going to break. If you're training in resilience, you are going to break.
That's exactly how I feel about it.
I don't like it, absolutely.
No. It's a real thing. And boy, is it everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Resilience this, resilience that. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, 100%. Okay. We started talking earlier, Ness, about the explosion of psychoanalysis and psychotherapy in the 20th century. Often these movements come from people who are physically in the same place. And there's a big Viennese school of psychotherapy.
Yes.
But we also acknowledged, didn't we, that these are...
Psychoanalysis,
sorry. We acknowledge that they're drawing upon lots of kind of... It could be Taoist, it could be mystical, it could be Sufi, it could be Babylonian, it could be Sanskrit, all these different traditions. Because obviously previous generations have understood the psyche as well. We're not the first generation.
Absolutely not.
We might be the first to put these models. Often you get these pockets of... it's like Apple came from Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, came from this club of people, all of whom were trying to reinvent the personal computer. And Bill Gates came out of that, and Jobs came out of that. You get these literally small, like in the Renaissance, there was a square mile within Florence that the Renaissance came from.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this was Vienna, wasn't it, in the 20th century?
Vienna and... Switzerland, so that sort of area, Jung is Swiss.
Right.
But he obviously became very well known at actually quite a young age for his work, and came to the attention of Freud.
Right.
And it was in 1909, I think, something like that.
You had at the same time in Europe similar movements, not the same, but you had Gurdjieff, who was part of the Seekers After Truth, who actually popularized eventually the Enneagram, and he went around the world trying to discover the wisdoms of all different ancient civilizations. But it was quite an explosion in the early 1900s of people converging into what you might call modern science, but actually codifying into what is acceptable modern science to us today, all of these ancient mystical traditions. Is it fair to say that we might characterize Freud in really crude terms as really someone who really understood the subconscious, but put the subconscious more into kind of primeval sexual terms? And is that a crude summary of Freud?
It's a crude summary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But is it true broadly that Jung took it a step further,
absolutely,
and understood the more mystical storytelling of the subconscious?
Well, this is the split comes in the form of libido, also this concept of the collective unconscious, that our instincts are driven by these archetypal patterns, and the collective unconscious was in direct conflict with Freud's ideas that it is our personal sexual repressed desires that are informing our behavior.
And so even in the Leonardo da Vinci example, Leonardo da Vinci talks about a bird pecking on his eye or something like this. And Freud interpreted that all about his homosexuality, for example. Right. But other people have said, no, it was just a bird. It was.
Sure.
It did actually happen. It wasn't a story. So arguably, someone in the Jungian camp might argue that Freud saw penises everywhere, even where there weren't penises, or where there wasn't repressed sexual energy. Is that fair? That a Jungian person might say that Freud overplayed
Yes, and he
power of
overemphasized the power of sexual libido.
sexual suppression or libido suppression.
Repression.
But libido, in Jungian terms, as you've explained, is not always or not necessarily that sexual energy.
It can be.
Yeah, but not always.
But it's not absolutely no. And mostly probably not.
But mostly not. Okay. So Jung took Freud's work, but also really, not imposed, but introduced the idea of the collective unconscious.
Archetypes.
All the stories that are inherited, the operating system we inherit at birth, the structures that actually we neatly put our own experiences into, consciously and subconsciously, but mostly unconsciously. And then I would say Adler came along, and Adler's big reveal, I think, was the idea of the fact that we have we have a self-ideal, which is how we'd like to be. We have a current sense of self. And that gap between our current sense of self and our self-ideal can cause us stress. And some people just knuckle down and with courage close that gap. And others get distracted by sideshows, Christmases, birthdays, sort of self-protective behavior that we deal with that gap. And also sometimes blame. So that's crudely how I see those three. Okay. And then perhaps someone like Viktor Frankl after the war and existentialism is actually almost a fourth kind of energy, or a fourth school. But really it's those first three. It's Freud, Jung and Adler that really came out of the Viennese school.
Yes, and really created the foundations of what we work with today.
And are we too hung up on those schools? To what extent should we still be tribal around those schools? And to what extent should we be reinventing a melange? I'll tell you why, because in the martial art that I do, Wing Chun, Bruce Lee basically said, right, I'm going to do my own thing. There's arguments about why he did, right? But a purist Wing Chun person is saying, you can't screw with 1,000 years of development of this very systematic Wing Chun and then in over 2 years reinvent it. The flip side is that perhaps we shouldn't get too hung up in something that Jung today might revise. If Jung today was around today.
No,
how fluid or stuck is the Jungian?
Well, it all depends.
Practice?
I mean, there are absolute staunch classical Jungians who really stick to the teachings. And then there are going to be people who use a hint of Jung, I definitely see quite a few people who are very curious about Jung. They don't necessarily want to do a Jungian training, but they want to understand about Jung and incorporate it into their therapies. So I think that there's a lot of flexibility that way. To my mind, because society is always changing, the collective is always changing. So our archetypal images are always changing. And so we can't be stuck.
And not just being changing as in creating new ones, but which ones are to the fore, right? So after 9/11, we have a whole bunch of sort of cultural, we consume news and stories that might send our energy to a certain type of collective unconscious storytelling. So at any one point, society might be dialing up and dialing down which ones are really important to us or really driving us or really
or what is coming up into
versus,
what is coming up into consciousness. Exactly. I mean, there were instances, for instance, it very famously before the Second World War, between the First and Second World War, Jung was in correspondence with other analysts, and he saw within his own practice dream patterns that were pointing towards war. Images of rivers of blood, for instance, things like that. So Yes. So that imagery was very specific to that time.
And I spoke about Leonardo da Vinci before, but Leonardo da Vinci was possessed by this idea of the flood, and he, throughout his life, he had this idea of a watery end to civilization, that the flood will come, and he wrote about it, his dreams, because they were repetitive, and it's interesting that over certain times, these very ancient archetypes will hold society for a period, and then we might, as a society, move to the power of another fear, another archetype, another piece of storytelling. And what general advice, either in terms of self-understanding or in terms of practical actions they can take as part of a process, what advice could someone like you give someone watching this that is perhaps applicable to them today? It might be that there's a long process ahead of them, but what advice would you like to give to someone watching this?
If someone's watching this and they find themselves feeling curious about this work, one of the first things I do is get reading. There are some wonderful books out there that outline Jungian theory in a very palatable, readable way. Murray Stein being one of them, Map of the Soul, his book. It's academic, but it's totally absorbable, as you well know, because you've read it.
Your previous recommendation of the Jacobi,
Jacobi,
she was around at the time of Jung.
Yes,
and sometimes you get a situation where people almost need this translator. And she was almost, do you know what I mean? So he would practice and practice and practice, and she'd be like, "Let me tell you what he's saying."
Well, as quite a few women did.
Quite
a few women did this for him.
So I found her powerful, as in, it's a great summary of the Jacobi book, and thank you for pointing me in that direction, because as a beginner, she was like, I'll translate this for
absolutely. I think it's a wonderful book.
Brilliant, yeah.
But you know, a lot of the female women that Jung mentored, Marie von Franz, Jacobi, Emma Jung, his wife, they all have the most wonderful way of interpreting his work, and I find it all much more relatable.
I'd say the most essential reading for somebody who's really trying to discover Jung for the first time is his memoir, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, which is obviously gives the full scope of his life, but it also gives a wonderful overview of all of his theory. It's very readable. It's highly personal, and really a wonderful reflection of the man.
Thing number one is to get reading. And there's the Jacobi book, there's the Murray Stein books. He's also done one on individuation, which we talk about.
And actually another great writer is Robert Johnson.
Right.
This is a nice book called Inner Work.
Okay.
Which I highly recommend. And he's written he wrote about the shadow. He wrote about he and she. The masculine and the feminine. It's really interesting.
And is there a second piece of advice about helping people notice? Can people begin to notice? Is it possible to notice when your actions might be driven by something that is worth investigating?
Something that's driven by the unconscious.
Yes. Can you become conscious? Isn't that the work to some degree? You can start, if someone's watching this or listening to this, how might they start to become conscious about how the unconscious is driving them?
Well, for one thing, examining our reactions to things. One of the great ways to reclaim the unconscious is to understand our projections, and that is to understand our shadow. And so we learn a lot about ourselves through our projections. So when I'd say to somebody who hasn't done this work or but is thinking about maybe doing this work is if you get an irrational, strong feeling about someone, that you're like, you know, you meet someone and you have an irrational dislike of them immediately. And you start to think, I think that person's really selfish, really self-absorbed person, actually. I don't like him. I don't want to be around that person. That is probably a projection of your own shadow. Now, see, and everybody who does that, there's like, no, I am not a selfish person. Look at all the selfless things I do. That doesn't mean your shadow isn't selfish.
Because actually, you may be doing the unselfish things because
As an
of the
expression
fear,
of persona.
as the fear of being selfish. Yeah.
Yeah. We wouldn't want to be perceived as such.
Yeah.
So noticing one's reactions to things, noticing when something kind of gives you a little tingle, you know, you know, something that sort of makes you sort of sit up and doesn't quite sit right. You can also understand when you have been projected upon.
Okay.
That's
Unfairly,
a feeling. Unfairly. I can tell you, you know when you've been projected upon. Woo.
So use an Enneagram lens, which is the lens that I'm, tend to rely on as a first port of call for this sort of thinking, is someone who's an Enneagram 1 who's a perfectionist is actually often hard on others. And that comes from their own fear of their own imperfection. So they will be very, very hypercritical of others. And that's because they're really afraid of their own imperfection, for example. I don't know whether that translates into Jungian.
Yes, what I would say is the person who is hypercritical is protecting themselves against their own unconscious material.
Yes. Great. Thank you. One thing I would just like to talk about before we wrap up this amazing interview, thank you, or conversation, not interview, conversation, thank you, is there is in what you might call the corporate world a tool which was Myers-Briggs and is now sort of slightly being replaced by the insights discovery tool. So some people watching this might say, oh, right, which is like this idea of the 4 colours where you've got your yellow and your blue and your green and your red. And that comes to some degree from that. You mentioned a circle and a cross earlier. And they've reframed it from how Jung did it. So Jung tended to think about thinking and feeling and sensing and intuition. And then separately, another lens of introverted and extroverted.
Indeed.
And I think people in the corporate world might be interested to know actually that insights discovery work previously as represented by Myers-Briggs is actually not the entirety of Jung, not at all.
No.
But it is part of his work.
Absolutely.
Can we just describe that axis? Because I think he drew it as thinking, feeling, intuition, sensing, and separately had introvert and extrovert. The way that insights draw it is actually introvert, extrovert, intuition or thinking and feeling, and actually sensing and intuition they've separated off as another thing, as it happens the way they draw it. But let's go to Jung's explanation of that. He said you can't be, we have a tendency to move either to thinking or to feeling, and we have a tendency to either go from sensing and intuition. And what I'm fascinated by is that Jung, as far as I'm read, and Jacobi describes this, is he described thinking and feeling as both rational. What he said was that it's a 1 and a 0. When I'm thinking like a computer, like rationally and logically like a computer program, 1 and 0, 1 and 0, true, not true, like you do in an algorithm. So that's a rational process of true, not true. Whereas feeling is likey or no likey. That's basically, do I like this or not like this?
Or do I value this?
Okay.
It's understanding, it's a judgment.
Okay.
It's much more about judgment
Right,
and value than it is about emotion.
It's also about, but on a feeling perspective, it's also, am I comfortable or uncomfortable as well? Is there a sort of, I feel uncomfortable or I feel comfortable? Was that an element of feeling?
Not the way I know it.
Okay,
not the way I know it, but I'm not saying that it isn't the case. I'm just saying not the way I know it.
The point is that that what he was saying was people tend to have a personality which tends to a bias of thinking or a bias of feeling. And then on the other axis, sensing is noticing the little details, but intuition is stepping back from that and sensing the implications of all of those details and being able to interpret the chaos through the gut. That's my understanding.
Yeah,
of
through
how
the gut.
exactly.
Through the gut. Exactly. Intuition is they aren't rational.
Because it's actually not a yes/no thing. It's
No.
It's an interpreting the complexity. It's being
Yes,
able
it
to.
is.
It's the gut, because the gut can interpret
it's a
complexity in a
spontaneous.
complex way.
It's a spontaneous knowing.
Yes, exactly.
Intuition.
So it happens in a moment, but it interprets 1,000 bits of data.
Indeed, of course, it's not. It's intuition is exactly based on a lot of data points that we're unconscious of.
Yeah.
And if you with typology, you will have a primary function and a secondary function, and then the function that's the most. So your primary function is the most in consciousness or the most available to you. And then the opposite of that is the most deeply unconscious one. Then in your secondary type, let's say you're a thinker, so you will be, let's say you're an intuitive thinker. So your primary is intuition, deeply unconscious sensate. Then the next port of call for you is thinking. And then also feeling will be more in the unconscious, but not as unconscious as sensate.
As the primary one.
As the primary one. So you have accessibility a little bit more.
So let's draw this a bit. It's really important that, and I think people hopefully will bear with us. But so thinking is opposite from feeling, and intuition is different from being in a sense of, or sensate or sensing, whatever word we want to use. Is sensing literally describing the input of our five senses, or our X number of senses, however many we've got, 5 or 6 or 7, discuss. So that's like you're describing touching there with riding.
Relation to the physical world.
Right, okay. So if we are highly intuitive, are we to some degree cut off from
the
sensing?
sensate? Exactly. That's exactly, because it's in the unconscious. We don't have access to it the way we do our intuition. And, I have sensate clients who don't have strong intuition.
It's quite powerful talking to you about this, because I am highly, highly intuitive. Sorry, this isn't, oh my God, I'm so intuitive. That's where I score highly on that axis, right?
I'm sure.
So, and it's interesting that I'm at DIY and so I need to learn.
Yeah.
The therapy for me would be to experience a sensing kind of thing. Bringing
sensation into consciousness.
Okay. And what do you mean by bringing it into consciousness, the actual experience of it?
Yes, by experiencing it, by putting oneself in a position where one can use that function.
Right.
You make it more accessible to the consciousness. By making it a
somatic experience.
Yes.
Building it into the nervous system.
Yep.
Therefore, it's a balancing. And
indeed.
If Jung talked about, which he did, and I think we spoke about this briefly, which was, I think he described the idea of psychic totality, which you described as individuation, rightly, because you know what you're talking about. But it's this idea of, over our lifetime, it's our job to balance these things and create wholeness. And I'd like to just make a quick advert for what I think those things are, so you can critique this. One is our consciousness and our unconsciousness, linked therefore to balancing thinking, feeling, and balancing sensing and intuition. And those things are linked, the conscious and unconscious are linked, because it's the accessing the unconscious and shadow nature of each of those. But also, I think he talked about balancing our female and male energy in our lifetime.
That's a whole other episode.
But let's just put it as a teaser for another conversation.
Sure.
So he spoke about a whole bunch of balancing that is almost our life's journey to become more psychic whole. So what we really, this is really an advert for wholeness.
It's absolutely, and when I was listening to your preamble for the podcast, I thought, absolutely, absolutely, this is about wholeness. And also, when you talk about the podcast, you know, you're talking about ancient healing, and this is connected to ancient energies.
It's connected because
which sounds a bit
it's
airy-fairy,
connected
but
to
you know.
ancient because it's true, and what's been true for a long time is still true now. It's ancient because ancient civilizations had models and languages to try and describe it.
Absolutely. If you read any fairy tale or any myth, they are portraits of psyche. They are portraits of psyche.
The Cinderella example that you gave earlier.
Exactly.
And it's also ancient because the layers that have been laid down to form the collective unconscious have been laid down by many, many generations of experience. And so we're just experiencing the culmination of the experiences that have formed those archetypes of that collective unconscious. So thank you for explaining this. And I think, you know, what we'd love you to do is to go to work with us, really to remind ourselves, as I said at the start of this podcast, about how fundamental emotion is to our health, and how fundamental the understanding of the unconscious is to allowing us to have good emotions and positive relationships. And this balancing of thinking, feeling, sensing, intuition, arguably, you know, understanding the balance between extrovert and introvert, female and masculine energy, the consciousness, the unconscious, the spirit and soul, this expanding and balancing, and this recognizing our connection, not just with ourself, but with all of the world around us. Is there anything else, Ness, you'd like to say? And, you know, to sum up for the first episode we've done with you.
Well, first of all, it's been absolutely fantastic to be able to sit here and talk Jung. And I hope that I've been able to present his work as a sort of totality, but in an understandable, bite-sized way. It's very, very complex work.
It is.
And a lot of the concepts are quite amorphous and hard to pin down. And what I feel so strongly is, you know, I want others to be able to have access to this type of work. But it is for everyone. If you can be brave, if you're really willing to go on a journey of discovery. And that might sound cliche, but that is what happens. And, you know, it is the hero's journey. It is full of pitfalls and danger. But we hope through the journey that we gain understanding and a sense of self.
We're so grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.